Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternities, live discussion on continuing my top 25 favorite episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. We are up now to my number 20, which is A Quality of Mercy from Strange New Worlds. So I'm joined here by a couple guests, as always, the usual suspects to discuss my picks on my top 25. So first joining me, as always, my sister Alyssa. Alyssa, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. Sorry I missed the last one, so it's good to be back and discussing your top 25 with you.
So Captain Alyssa, but I'm the alternate Captain
Yeah.
Mark from the alternate universe. Anyway, and also joining us, as always, Darrin from D's Reviews. Darrin, thanks so much for joining.
Always happy to be joining you. Really been enjoying these top 25 countdown of Star Trek. So I couldn't miss that you had a modern Trek episode in on this. So I'm very excited to jump in on for this one tonight.
Cool. So, yeah, I wanted to start with that. The fact that I decided to put modern Trek. So when I was coming up with my top 25 episodes, I was basically going off of a lot of the other countdowns that I did for the various shows. My top 10s for Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, Original Series, Voyager, Enterprise, and sort of smushing them all together. But I also did a top 10 for modern Trek, and I decided, well, why not throw that in the mix too? So when I did that video, the cutoff point, I believe, was after Strange New World Season 1, so it doesn't include Lower Deck Season 3 or the second half of Prodigy or Picard Season 3 or Strange New World Season 2, obviously. And so that was the cutoff point for that top 10. I decided, well, I'll stick with that top 10 and throw it in here. Now, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. I don't know if some people will agree. It's definitely different putting something that you've seen more recent in. And perhaps with time, this episode, I will think more or less of it. It might go higher or lower on my countdown. I will say that this is the only episode of the Modern Trek that will be my top 25. There was another episode that almost made it, which is the Discovery episode. I believe it's called Project Pegasus. The one which, spoilers, I guess, for that episode, but it's the one where Arium dies, where she's taken over by what's that thing called? Control. So that would probably be in my 25 through 50 range if I were doing that, but it didn't quite make my top 25. This is the only one that did. And Alyssa, I know that you decided not to include any of the Modern Trek when you were doing your top 100, which I think if I was doing more than 25, I might have made the same decision. But I don't know if you wanted to talk about that or whether or not you thought I shouldn't have included this. Or
No, I think you should do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But I can talk about why I didn't include modern Trek. And you could save yourself the trouble. Usually at the end, you ask, "Oh, where would you rank this?" And I wouldn't. It's in big NA. I would not rank this anywhere. And it's just because I have a really hard time wrapping my brain around how I would fit in an episode that I saw for the first time a year ago with episodes that I saw 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and I've seen, 10, 20, 50, 100 times, like comparing. It's just two apples and oranges to me. I just can't wrap my head around where would I fit this in. So if you ask me where would this go in here, I have no idea. I don't whether this would be. So I'm going to sit out. I don't know if you're planning on asking that question again, like you normally do.
Oh, I was planning on asking that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you right now, I have no idea.
Okay, so you'll just sit that one out. So you wouldn't know if you would have it higher or lower.
I have no idea because I don't know how to compare modern Trek to episodes that I've seen 30 years, like 100 times. Like I don't, and I've only this one came out a little over a year ago now. How to make that comparison? I can't wrap my brain around that. So that's why I didn't do it. If you feel confident in doing it, you should go ahead and do it. And I wouldn't tell you that I don't think you should do it one way or the other. You should do what you want. I just know that I could not make that comparison. I will tell you that um, I do plan on doing a top 25, maybe even a top 30. And if I'm really ambitious, maybe a top 50. I don't know how far I'll go. I was originally thinking a top 25, but I'm like, God, how am I going to fit in 25 episodes? Because there's more than 25 that I really like of Modern Track. I want to do that toward the end of the year. And I can tell you that this will be pretty high up on that list. But as far as how I would compare it to Star Trek episodes I've seen 100 times, I don't know how to do that. I can only speak of this like as a Modern Trek.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference. Like this is, as I said, that's probably the entry on my top 25 that's more tentative. That's probably more likely to change one way or another because it's only been a year since I've seen it. But I think for me, there's some episodes that I instantly recognize as classics. Like as soon as I see them, like when I saw the episode "Duet" from DS9, I like immediately knew that this was going to be one of my favorite episodes of all time, and it's remained that way. And I got that feeling with this episode as well. That like as soon as I saw that, I think it was like an instant classic. But maybe over time. But and also I was gonna say like definitely it is different comparing an episode you just saw a year ago to episodes you've been watching repeatedly throughout the like 30 or 35 years. I do get that to a lesser degree. I also have that issue with comparing, say, episodes of the original series to episodes of like Enterprise or Voyager. But this is definitely a more extreme example of that. But yeah, as I said, it's a bit more tentative. Anyway, Darrin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of recency bias, I think, is really considerable, and even to more the point, I think you have really different eras of storytelling. I mean, you look at TNG, DS9, Voyager, and even to a certain extent Enterprise, all have a similar feel. I mean, you've got some similar producers and such that are all involved with the shows as well, but they're kind of an era of similar storytelling. And modern storytelling is just very different. I mean, not only just from the effects, but from the writings, the style, the character work. I think what the audience sort of expects in a little deeper, more complex manner. It's almost the same way as looking at TNG versus the original series. Again, very different styles of storytelling, really, from the more melodrama to the more thoughtful that you get sort of with those next generation era shows. So I kind of get the idea of being a little hesitant on including them. I don't know, maybe for my sake also, I've really enjoyed a lot of new Trek, so I would want to put these in some of my lists as well personally. And this one in particular is just bridges all of those roads so well, considering that it is sort of a retelling of a classic original series episode from a different perspective. And the way that they're able to kind of tie in a lot of the visuals and styles and stuff. There's a lot of homages they do really beautifully in here, as well as kind of topping off the season story. So, I mean, I get why this is in your list, because I think it does sort of ring through on a lot of those different levels. I'm just really curious, which of the Enterprise episodes are going to be up here. That's what I'm so kidding, folks. I'm so kidding. But yeah, I'm excited.
I do have some Enterprise episodes coming. Don't you doubt that. I'm not going to exclude old Enterprise.
For me, it's less about the storytelling styles and differences and more about a lot of what goes into my top 100 ranking, my top 25 ranking is the nostalgia and how much it sat with me and how much it meant to me as a kid and how much a part of my existence those episodes are. And that's why I said a little bit of a spoiler. If you haven't watched my top 25, you should watch it. That the highest ranked Enterprise episode for me is number 21. And that's not because I like Enterprise less, it's because I am less familiar with those episodes. I didn't really watch them as they aired as much. I didn't really watch them 100 times, let it sit with me. My appreciation for Enterprise has really come in the last 10 or 15 years or so, where I've gone back and watched them. And so that's why I don't have them higher ranked than number 21. It's not because I don't think they're as good, it's because I haven't sat with them. I haven't watched them 100 times. They're not a part of my childhood and nostalgia and existence. So that is why I could never have Modern Trek, and they just can't compare to those kinds of episodes that are more than just episodes to me. I have specific memories of watching them. They're very much a part of who I am. And Modern Trek is just a year ago. So that's why I wouldn't have it. That's not to say that this isn't an instant classic, as you said, Mark. I have the same feeling that it's an instant classic, as just I can't compare it to an instant classic that I've also seen 100 times. And sat with it for 20 or 30 years.
Now that's fair. And also in response to Darrin, I would say just for me personally, I think the difference between style and storytelling and visuals between Modern Trek and 90s Trek is probably on par with the difference between the original Star Trek series and Modern Trek. They're also very different in style. And even if you go from the start of Modern Trek, the first couple seasons of TNG to the last couple seasons of Enterprise, there's a mighty difference there as well.
For sure. And Enterprise did do a whole lot in its serialized storytelling and bit as well. And so I joke about Enterprise again. I've been enjoying the series for the most part as I've been doing my rewatch. But like Alyssa, I also understand it's a newer show to me. So is it going to sit in the back of my mind in the same way that a lot of these old Next Generation and DS9 and such episodes might sit in more? Yeah, that I get the comparative difference on that. Just on how long that they've really sat with you and that you've really learned to appreciate or go, wow, I thought that was great, but on rewatching, God, that got really cheesy, so.
Yeah, and also I will say there was probably, if I were doing a top 50, it would probably be a couple Lower Decks episodes in there too. Let's see. So I want to say hello to everyone in the chat. We have Stephen Kennedy and Jordan Johnson. Thanks for joining. We have Jordan Johnson who asks, where would you rank the Lower Deck Strange New Worlds crossover episode? Now, that's an episode I just saw a month ago, so that's even harder. I would say if I was doing a ranking of Modern Trek, it would probably be in my top 5 for sure. I'm not sure where, and I haven't. It's still way too fresh to see where I would put it in the overall top 20. Would it make my overall top 25? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, if I remember from our season discussion, it ranked pretty much near the top there on yours for this past season. So
it was my favorite of the season.
Yeah. So I would imagine it might stand out pretty well.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, yeah, and Alyssa, I did want to say that you kind of inspired me to do my own top 100 eventually, but it's probably, I decided it's not going to be for another 4 years or something. Once I finish rewatching, how I'm rewatching all the shows, and that's going to take me 3 years or something. And by then, some of these Modern Trek shows would have finished, Discovery and maybe Lower Decks, and so I'll include those too.
Mine has been at least 4 or 5 years in the making too. Going through and rewatching each of the series, and I did some of my reviews back on the Acting Top Guys channel, but it's taken me years to get through all of them. And my goal was always, once I get through Enterprise, I'm doing 100. So that's why I'm so excited to be doing it, because I've been thinking about doing this for several years now. So it's several years in the making for me as well.
Yeah, well, as was this top 25 for me. I've been getting requests for me to do this for years, and I finally decided to do it. Anyway, all right, so let's jump into this episode specifically. A quality of mercy, just the overall thoughts on the episode. As I already said, I think this is an instant classic. If one would note, this is number 20 on my list, and Balance of Terror was number 25. So I am saying I like this better. Because, don't get me wrong, and again, it's apples and oranges, hard to compare a classic like that I've seen a billion times, like Balance of Terror, to this episode I just saw a year ago. But if I try to be objective, I like the added touch of the alternate timeline. I think that adds something for me, being a huge fan of. See, this is like an episode of What If, basically, and I fucking love What If. I love those possible parallel universe. What if this happened? What if Pike was in command of the Enterprise during the events of Balance of Terror? How would this happen? Not only that, this ties in like the overall. To me, this is part of what makes season one of my favorite season of Modern Trek. Is that it ties in the overall storyline that they were doing all season about Pike doubting his being afraid of his future after seeing his future and discovery of that he's going to end up in the BP chair, and this horrible future that he's really fearing. And I think this episode ties it up so well, so beautifully. And not only that, it also ties up Pike's and Spock's relationship so beautifully in a way that like retroactively makes the original series better. And yeah, and I think it's just in the way that they pay homage to Balance of Terror is really tickles my fandom, my fanboy nerves. So yeah, it's and just the way it's acted, the way it's shot and edited, and everything like that. I just think this is easily my favorite episode of Modern Trek. So Darrin, we'll go to you next. What are your thoughts on this episode?
I actually rewatched this episode again today, and then I watched The Flash, the new DC movie, both of which dealing with changing timelines. And I have to say, I really wish that I'd watched Flash first and then this one again second, because it is so well done. It is so beautiful. You're right. The way that it ties up that first season storyline with his concern about the future and can he change it? Does he have to accept his fate? A beautiful choice of episode and a way of looking at the difference, like you said, giving a great homage to the original series with also improving on it, because you could see while we like Pike for his willingness to negotiate and look at options, this deals with a time when Kirk's aggressiveness, willing to just go out and do what needs to be done, a little more brazen self, was the right play to make. And then building on top of that, here you can see the cost is between him or Spock adds whole new layers onto it. I mean, the depth that these guys are able to really play out. I mean, Anson Mount is just astounding in all the little moments inside of this episode and all the weighing of things back and forth and back and forth. I think it was just beautifully done. On top of that, they do great homages in the original series. Uhura's got the old Uhura costume on, the Nichelle Nichols from the original series. Just that little extra drape. I think Paul Wesley does an amazing job as a Kirk. I think he really steps into that role well. I really, again, now that I've seen him in a few more episodes, watching this again and how he's playing it, I'm really just committed to him as the new Kirk. I think he works perfectly. And they do small things like the little soft light focus on the eyes where everything is dark. And there's like the moment where Ortega kind of looks back and it's just, I mean, they do such a good job with all of that. it really is just well done. And the way that it ends, not only does it wrap it up in a beautiful, like, hey, I'm going to die for the right reasons. I mean, not die, but I'm going to suffer and everything's going to be great. And these people are going to go on to better lives. You know, he's dancing through the bridge at the end there. And then it gives us our cliffhanger about Una, which I'm sure we'll touch on. So I think it really like knocks, it checks every box in doing this type of thing right, of really tying into the old series, wrapping up a big storyline, and giving it a weight and thought of what is it that we need in these times. Sometimes it's this, but sometimes we need something else. And I think it really kind of, again, closes that loop very nicely for Pike.
Cool. And Alyssa, your thoughts?
It's funny Darrin mentions just having watched The Flash, because I also watched The Flash.
Oh, really?
First time, actually. I hadn't seen it before.
Yeah, same.
Oh, is that on HBO Max now?
Yeah, or Max.
Max, yeah.
It is. I just noticed that it was on there last night, so I watched it, and then I watched Quality Mercy today. So I watched it in the correct order, so that I have the better episode or the better, show or movie, whatever you want to call it. And I have the good taste in my mouth after having watching a higher quality. I didn't think The Flash was terrible. Don't get me wrong. Like, I accepted a lot of enjoyment out of it. I definitely overall felt like I was entertained and I got an enjoyment out of it. But the multiversal and time travel logic is just kind of nonsensical, and they don't really explain it. And that's my kind of beef with that movie. But so it was nice to like close out with the Quality of Mercy.
For the quality of
Mercy.
mercy.
A lot of yeah. I do like compare it to an episode like yesterday's Enterprise, which when I do get through my top 100, you all will see is, I'm not going to spoil exactly where it is, but it's pretty high up there. So that I consider one of the best episodes in Star Trek. And I definitely put it on par with that. But more so, I think that this is a Star Trek tribute episode, or paying homage to a previous series done well. And I think in general, modern Trek is so much better at doing that than the 90s Trek was. And I've often compared this to Trouble with Tribbles, which is a fun tribute to an original series episode. It's a good time. It's enjoyable. I will push back when people try to say this is the number one Deep Space Nine episode, or even in the top 10, or even in the top 50, or even in the top 100 of Deep Space Nine episodes, because it is not a Deep Space Nine episode. It is a fun little tribute to the original series episode, but it does nothing to service the characters of Sisko, Dax, Worf, Odo, any Deep Space Nine character. It is not about them at all. The whole point of it is just to have fun and see some tribbles and to see the Deep Space Nine characters interact with the original series characters. But it is not a Deep Space Nine episode and does nothing to service those characters, which is what makes this so brilliant. Because not only does it service the character of Captain Pike, but I would dare say it is one of the best character episodes, period, in Star Trek, at least in modern Trek. And it's because it closes out a season-long arc beautifully. It's something that we had been building to all season long, and it is a conclusion that wraps that arc up beautifully. And it also proves that people are just objectively wrong when they call Strange New Worlds episodic, because it is very serialized with the character through stories. In fact, I was just thinking as I was rewatching this that you would be better off having not ever seen Balance of Terror and watching this than you would be not having seen any of season one or seeing the Discovery episode where he first meets the Klingon time crystal people and sees his future. Like if you had seen none of season 1 and you didn't see that and you watched this episode, I think you would be missing a lot of important context. So I completely disagree that this Strange New World is episodic in the way that the previous shows have been. It's serialized in a different way, and you need that context. And when you have that context, this episode is so brilliant. And not only is it an amazing tribute and amazing at paying homage and way better than anything the 90s Trek ever did in that regard, but it is an incredible conclusion to a story arc that we've been following all season. So this episode, just fantastic.
I do want to point out Jordan Johnson in the chat gave me a super chat. So thanks so much for the super chat. It's asking, do you think the Pike flashback story arc kind of takes a backseat in season 2? Well, as we'll probably get to towards the end of when we cover that towards the end of the episode, I think it was resolved in this episode. So I don't think there's really much more to say about it in season 2, which is why I think they went a different way. And I talked about this when we covered season 2. I think they replaced it with something that was way less interesting to me, the whole Pike and Patel storyline. But yeah, I don't think they needed to cover this more in season 2. I think that would kind of be beating a dead horse a little bit, because I think it's pretty much resolved here. I mean, they could have touched on it maybe, but it wasn't totally necessary to do so.
Yeah, they kind of leave it in such a nice place. As I said, that kind of jaunty bit at the end. I think it really is one of those where that's the sign that he has come to peace and accepted what's got to happen and is now able to move forward with whatever he has going forward. So yeah, I think revisiting it it'd be like putting a hat on a hat.
Yeah, it would have been weird if they had gone back to it again, because it's been resolved. I thought very cleanly resolved. I would have been mystified if they brought it up again after that point. Like there would be no reason to.
All right, so let's see here. Just let me try to bring up my notes. Okay, so let's start with the opening sequence where Pike is on his outpost and he meets one of the young kids. He recognizes his name because he learned all the names of all the cadets who are going to be in the accident that's going to happen in the future. And he knows that this one is the one who's going to die. And so this haunts him. And haunted by it, he talks to number 1 about it. You could tell like that there's something wrong because he kind of freaks out. And she sort of gets it out of him that it's one of the kids that's going to die. And she's sort of telling him, well, who's to say you have to follow the future? And this is like a talk we sort of heard Picard and some other characters say in different episodes, being like, well, who's to say your future is better than my future? My future hasn't happened yet. It's unwritten. I can sort of do whatever I want I shouldn't have to follow by what you say the future is going to be. And that was kind of her argument. I think it got to him. And the more, like, he was obviously very disturbed by the fact that this, knowing that this young man was going to die, and so he, drafts this letter. I thought, again, this was a really, really strong way to start the episode. I think actually, granted, number 1 doesn't know the full context of everything. She wasn't down on the planet with the weird Klingons or whatnot, but I think she makes a good argument. And as I said, is arguments that like characters in other shows had made before, that just because you tell me this is my future, why can't I just make a better future? Why can't I just do, use this knowledge to make the future better? And I think the way, again, I always love Anson Mount as Pike is absolutely amazing, particularly in this episode, because you could see how haunted he was and how it was just eating at him, knowing that this boy he just met is destined to die, and he's feels guilty. Is like if he does nothing, and so he reacts. And I think that was kind of natural for him. So I love this scene. Alyssa, we'll start with you. What were your thoughts on this whole thing?
Sorry, I just got sidetracked by reading Jordan Johnson's comments there. So remind me again what you were just talking about.
Oh, so the opening scene.
Because I was looking at his
No worries. So it's the opening scene where Pike is being haunted by the fact that he knows this young kid's gonna die. He just met him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have much to add to that. I mean, this is a good setup. This is kind of continuing on. This has been building from the beginning of season or the beginning of the season, going back to that Discovery episode where he's really struggling with his future. But I think he was more struggling with his own fate. I think that's where he was when he, at the first episode when he had a beard, and he was riding the horse. And now he's really looking at how it's going to affect other people, and he has a hard time looking at this kid. So it was a really powerful way to catch us back up on that storyline and to get back into the storyline and to start this episode off and to get us on the journey that we're about to go on. So I thought that was really powerful and effective to have him come face to face with this kid that he knows is gonna die and he's not gonna be able to save. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, Mark, like what you had said earlier, there's a reason. If you had seen all of these previous episodes, you get a lot more out of this episode because this has. Alyssa, sorry. You get a lot more out of this episode. Now that just triggered me about a train of thought. There we go. Just because the quandary of, can I change my future? Am I married to this future? Has been touched on periodically through this. So we can see this is really kind of an unresolved issue in his head. And yes, when you come across the child of an adult that's going to die down the road, it's not just his life that he's weighing in. It's these other people's lives. He has the power to change, give this kid a future. So if you are unresolved and unsure, of course, that's going to weigh down on it. And I think, again, he does that perfectly. And I love even the editing, how they drown everyone else out. You can barely hear them because you can tell that he's just stuck in his mind and he's just run through it. And again, Anson Mount's freaking incredible in this. He pulls these moments off very well, where you can see what he is thinking, what he's weighing through him, just in these small little moments. So yeah, to propel us forward to willing to go and at this point commit, I am going to save this kid's life, allows us to spiral into everything going forward. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a great, beautiful, quick setup. And you even have the callback to him as a beard, as something Patel mentions in the first little scene, as, yeah, thought you were going for like the old school captains with the beard. Which, again, calls back to the beginning of the episode. Another nice way to sort of wrap everything up. We're calling back to the pilot here. Also, she does one of my favorite things that they do in TV. You sit down, you have one bite of food, and then you go. I have to leave now. I just made you breakfast. Yeah, one bite. Okay, I gotta go. You see it? You see it all the time.
I think that's right up there with picking up the phone and talking without actually dialing. Senator!
Never saying goodbye, just hanging up.
Yeah.
I'm still caught up in the fact that apparently old school captains had beards. Like, what? This is a part of Trek. I am not familiar with Trek lore. Like, I didn't realize that was a thing.
Oh no, the old ship captains, right?
Or like, are they talking about like the old?
Yeah, that's what I got. Yeah,
I thought they were talking about like old Starfleet captains, and I'm like, well, Archer didn't have a beard. So.
Yeah,
that's the only old that we would know at this point. It's the original series.
Yeah.
So I wanted to address Jordan Johnson in the chat, saying that Picard says that in Enterprise didn't respond to it when I was talking about who's to say this future would be any better, which actually wasn't the episode I'm thinking of, but although that applies, but that was more of like a parallel universe, because like an alternate universe, because it's actually the present, but they were saying, who's to say this alternate universe isn't better than the other? And Guyton's like, I suppose I am. And he's like, not good enough, damn it, not good enough. Anyway, I love that episode. But no, I was actually thinking of the episode A Matter of Time, when you had that guy who's pretending to be from the future, and Picard made the argument like, who's to say the future is better than the one that's going to happen or whatever. But and I think there's several others as well. Alyssa gave another example in the chat, but yeah, I think there's
mine was more similar to Jordan's, which is like an alternate
timeline. Yeah.
Who's to say your timeline is better than my timeline, kind of thing. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the meeting of the future Pike, just appearing out of nowhere. And I love how this works. I love how he's drafting this letter. He's about to send it, and the future Pike appears. Like, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And of course, we gotta love that he's wearing the uniform from the movies, from the TOS movies, and he looks very. Anson Mount plays the character differently, more worn, more sort of gruff, and they sort of age him a bit with the makeup, which I think actually is subtle, so not like droopy old man makeup that looks terrible. And this is what blew my mind when I first saw this episode, because this is the kind of thing that I think could be absolutely amazing, awesome, like top tier Trek stuff, if done correctly and also if done sparingly, because I think like Voyager or whatever just went overboard with doing stuff like this, and they did it in such a mediocre way that it wasn't that interesting. The finale, anyway, but I think when Trek does it correctly, and this isn't something we've seen as particularly in modern Trek, them playing with time very much. And so I think it landed. That's why it shocked me to see it. And plus, I just thought it was, again, Anson Mount playing off of himself, having a conversation with himself, done so well. Again, in the way he just is, you can see the way he plays the older Pike, who just has so much sort of regret in his voice and is trying to tell him the proper way. And I love how he says, like, I know you understand that you're not going to put your life above the well-being of the galaxy, and that's how I convinced the Klingons to do this instead. And he's like, instead of what? He's like, well, the Klingons, they like to solve everything with a bat. Now this does involve like those weird Klingons with the time crystals, which is something I was always a bit iffy about on Discovery. That didn't really fit to me, but I don't care. Like, I'm fine to go with it. It's already established, and it's used here to tell an awesome story. So I'm totally willing to go with it. So absolutely love this scene. Darrin, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on this scene?
The uniform choice was perfect. For the rest of us, it kind of established where he would be in the timeline, which is kind of a beautiful little easy callback for people. But yeah, the weight, the exhaustion that older Pike brings to it. I think this is another one that's you're right. It can go either way, but the fact that he really plays it so much of someone who is he's beat out. He doesn't have to be tough. He doesn't have to be spiteful. He doesn't have to be anything. It's just that weight of his experience really carries completely through. I think what kind of makes this work out very well. And even the arguments that he brings forward to him, it's obviously very much what Pike would do. I think this was carried off beautifully. And you're right, in a way, the makeup reminded me of the Voyager episode we did recently with the elder Kim, where I think they did the same thing as a very subtle makeup aging where the weight of those years is carried on the actor's shoulder. And I think with that blend, I think that's what really made this pay off.
Yeah, and Mark, you mentioned that this really blew you away, and this is what really blew me away too. And especially since I think back to just a year ago, that they did an incredible job of keeping the actual plot of this episode under wraps, which is really difficult to do in the age of the internet. Like everything gets leaked nowadays. It is hard not. I mean, and as far as I know, not only did I not know, but I don't think that there was somebody on Reddit somewhere. Maybe there was, but I wasn't aware of it, that like had a leak to the plot and knew what it really was. It was just a complete and utter surprise, which was very effective. That's the way it should have been. Stranger Worlds has been good about, telling us when we need to know things, like giving us a warning that there's going to be a musical episode so I could start mentally preparing for it. That was good. And here, it would have really hurt the experience if I had any clue that this was going to be an alternate timeline episode, or that we were going to see an older Pike in a movie era uniform. I had no idea that any of that was going to happen. So it was such. I can still remember the feeling I had when first seeing that. It made me really giddy. It was such a very pleasant surprise. And then to kind of echo a little bit some of the things you were saying, Anson Mount was really incredible in playing the two different Pikes. And yeah, the makeup was subtle. The age comes in from the acting of Pike. He used a different, or Anson Mount rather, he used a different voice. Even when you first hear him, it sounds like an old man. I believe what he actually says is, "You'll figure out how to write it." When he's like writing, he's trying to figure out how to write it. He's like, "You'll figure it out," and you hear his voice in the dark, and it sounded like a rough old man. Just even the voice, somebody who had really been through some stuff. So Anson Mount played that beautifully. Now, apparently, I watched some YouTube video when this came out about like there are actually subtle updates to the uniforms. I am just not a uniform nerd at all. I don't really care, but apparently, like they updated it a little bit. There's little differences that you won't know unless you're a nerd and you look for little tiny things. But I thought I loved seeing that uniform. I thought. The whole thing, everything about it was just phenomenal to me.
Yeah. God, there was something you mentioned I wanted to talk about. Now it's lost my train of thought on what it was. God, no, I can't remember. Anyway, let's see.
Was a surprise how we didn't know about it.
Yes, that's right. Because I actually saw a YouTube video before I saw this episode that figured it out. I don't think it figured out everything, but just from watching the trailer, it was like, oh, they're wearing the uniforms that they saw Uhura in that uniform. They're wearing the uniforms they did in Kirk's time. So maybe this is set in the future, but Pike is the captain, so this is probably an alternate future. And this looks to be a Romulan ship, so maybe it's a recreation of Balance of Terror. so I had
that video, yeah, but still they had to figure it out. Like
like nerd.
Well, there are some people who just like analyze like every freeze frame of the trailer.
I am not discounting anyone's obsession or focus or drive. No, I just it is, and I say that proudly. I
didn't figure that out myself. I just watched this video. I was like, oh yeah, once they mentioned it. But even then, they didn't have the whole plot figured out. Just a general idea that maybe
we didn't know an older Pike would come around.
Exactly. Yeah. or where they were going with it. So I wasn't totally surprised. Thanks, nerd analyzing everything, but it's my fault for clicking on the video. But I still did not affect my enjoyment of the episode at all. I still loved it, and I still agree with what you said, Alyssa, that they did do a good job of keeping this under wraps. That only the nerdiest of nerds could figure this stuff out. All right, so where I want to move to next. So this is a big topic, so we can maybe cover different aspects of it or whatnot, what we think is relevant, but just overall getting into the fact that this is a recreation of Balance of Terror and how it worked. I will say, when I just watched this episode again today, I do feel like they maybe rushed some things a little bit, which might have been a necessity because they, we're taking a hour or 50-minute, 45-minute long episode and condensing it, and Strange New Worlds they're adding stuff at the start and the middle, so they kind of had to condense the bulk of the episode. But I think they hit all the right points. Even after watching that video, I wasn't positive it would be a Balance of Terror recreation. But when I saw the wedding, when the first thing he appeared at the wedding, I was like, yeah, it is Balance of Terror. And they even mentioned that line about the wooden ships, which is the line that I think Picard repeated this when Keiko and Miles got married as well, that Kirk originally said. And I like, and again, they had the sort of levity to it because Pike, was thrown into the future, so they had no idea who they were. And it was like, this is a wedding, right? It was like, so you and you. Obviously didn't know who these people were. And I thought that was a great way to start it. But then you get stuff, for me, something that I remember really loving when I first saw is some of the things were recreated line for line. Like, for example, when the outpost was being destroyed. I thought that was very cheesy and 60s-ish from Balance of Terror is one of the things I thought didn't age very well, where the guy who's on the outpost saying, "Do you see it, Enterprise? Do you see it?" And they managed to recreate it word for word, but yet make it not cheesy anymore. Actually make it like scary and make it intense. And I was so impressed with that. I thought that was very well. And then there was the musical callback when they played the dun 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 when they revealed the Romulan looked like Spock. I thought it was an interesting choice that Ortegas was kind of filling in the role of the bigot that Styles played in the original episode. I thought that, I don't know if I agree with that choice. That was maybe a bit bizarre for me. And I guess, because Pike remained captain, some people remained on the ship who wouldn't have been otherwise, like Mbaga is still there, and Ortegas, and rather than having Sulu, was Sulu? No, Sulu wasn't in this episode, was he? It was Styles.
Oh, originally, yeah, and Balance of Terror, yes.
Originally it was Styles and Sulu, yeah. So I guess they're implying some other, not just. Although we do hear Scotty's voice later, so he's still there. But yeah, so that was all interesting, and I heard, like, when this episode first came out, I heard a review that was sort of, oh, this isn't that good of an episode. One of their main complaints was, well, we had this scene with the Romulans talking to themselves, but if this is just Pike's version seeing the future, why would there be something going on outside of his perception? My response to that is, who gives a fuck? It's such a good scene, and it's a nice callback to Balance of Terror. I don't care. I love it. I just love that this, again, as I said at the top of the videos, is like a what if, and that was like, again, like amazing. I won't say this is better than yesterday's Enterprise, because spoiler, that is higher on my list, but it's different. Like, it's really good, but it does a different thing. Because it is more of a what if, where I guess yesterday's Enterprise is more general what if. It's like, what if the Federation was at war with the Klingons for all these years? But this is more specific, like what this episode featured Pike instead of Kirk, and I think that made this more unique. And that's why, yeah, absolutely love the recreation of Balance of Terror. I don't fault it at all. I think some people maybe thought, oh, they're just redoing what they already did, but I think it's definitely more nuanced than that. Alyssa, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, and they definitely had to cut some things out because, as you said, they have less time to work with because they have a beginning part that they needed to do and then an ending part that they needed to do, and yet still do the whole episode. And you don't want to do that's what makes it a great tribute. You don't want to just do it beat by beat. You don't just want to recreate. I think of the same thing in music when I think of a good cover song. I don't like it when they just redo the original song. I like it when the artist brings their own spin to it and their own flair, makes it their own, and does it really. There are some cover songs out there that I like better than the original because of what the new artist does with the song. So same concept here. They needed to put their own spin on it. Can't just tell it beat by beat, and yet still keep in some of the important beats, like as you said, the dun 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 dun, like honing in on Ethan Peck raising his eyebrow the way that they did with Leonard Nimoy raising his eyebrow. They had little touches like that, enough to bring up our nostalgia, but not too much to where it's like, oh, okay, you're just redoing an old episode. And they made some smart cuts too. Like, notice we do not get the phaser firing room in this episode. Remember the one episode where they had this special room where they go and fire phasers? Like, they have to walk down into this. It looked like they were in the basement, like fire phasers, and that's where. In the original episode, the guy in the married couple dies. Here they reversed it. They had the woman dying. But yeah, and that's what I kind of meant when at the beginning when I was talking about this being an excellent tribute episode, because it's not, it's not just taking our characters and, I guess it probably wasn't CGI back when Deep Space Nine did it, but like CGIing them into, or just like, whatever editing device they're using to put our characters into original series episode. It is taking the concept of original series episode and asking that what if question and showing us how it would play out in modern Trek with Pike. And so I thought it was an absolute brilliant adaptation or tribute or homage or whatever you want to call it of the original series episode. I kind of agree about the Ortegas thing, especially watching it now after seeing season 2 now, where they really focus on her as a Klingon war veteran and how she really has this thing with the Klingons. It seems like a bit much that she would also have this bias against the Romulans too. Like, she wasn't in a war with them. So, I mean, I guess they just want to have the regular actors appear on the show, but I kind of would have honestly preferred to see an actor playing Styles and like actually have that character on there. Maybe you could switch it up a little bit. If you really have to have Ortegas on there, like have Ortegas sit where she sits and maybe put Styles in Sulu's seat or something to mix it up. If you really, really need Ortegas, maybe I just seemed like they really wanted to have that actress in the episode, and I guess that would be my one and only critique of this adaptation is that the Ortegas piece doesn't quite fit for me, especially after having seen season 2 and seeing how she's so obsessed with the Klingons and having her like, have that same hatred for the Romulans too seems seems a bit much. There are other things too, like we know that in that episode, Una is not on the Enterprise, and this episode's explanation is that she's in a penal colony, but then in season 2 she got off on that. So, and that really has nothing to do with the timeline change. Like, I don't know what that has to do with anything. We're getting into Flash territory here, actually. It doesn't look like with a change that is made doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So, and we'll talk about that later when we get to the Una ending as well. Like, that's another piece that didn't quite fit for me because that is not the reason why Una wasn't in Balance of Terror. We don't know why she wasn't in Balance of Terror. Maybe she was off posing for posters that they would use in the 24th century. I don't know, training posters, but recruiting posters, I should say. But yeah, those would probably be the only things. And it would have been cool if if Celia Rose Gooding had the little beehive hairdo, but I know why they wouldn't do that, but they at least gave her the uniform. So yeah, except for a couple little minor nitpicks, I just think this adaptation was near flawless and just yeah, almost perfect.
All right, so just 1 second before we get to you, Darrin, I wanted to address super chat. Another super chat for Jordan Johnson. Thank you so much. Asks, do you see this as a trend in modern Trek, recreating classic episodes? We're seeing this a lot in movies right now. Yeah, I suppose like Endgame kind of recreated a couple of Marvel movies when they traveled back to them. But I wouldn't know if I'd call it a trend in modern Trek. I don't recall them doing this again other than this episode. They revisited the Telosians from the Cage, but that wasn't like a recreation. So no, I don't think it's a trend. I don't know if they'll do it again. I said they should do it again for the Menagerie, but
I interpreted this question as, do you think this will become a trend? Like,
will it become a trend?
Well, I mean, that's not what he says, but I guess that's the way I read it.
Yeah.
They'll keep doing this. Will they continue?
Sure. I don't think it will. Yeah. I don't think it will. I was going to bring up Star Trek Into Darkness because that is kind of a what if scenario of Star Trek 2. This is how Star Trek, the Khan thing happens in the Kelvinverse. And I think that's probably why I like that movie better than most people, because most people are like, oh, they're just ripping off Star Trek 2. I'm like, no, it's a what if? It's a parallel universe. And plus, I thought the first movie was a pile of shit, so I didn't take it serious anyway, and I didn't expect it to be good. So I was fine with it. But anyway, Darrin, let's get to your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think it's not Ortegas. I think it's Wartegas is who we're dealing with here. And it's funny that you actually say that, Alyssa, because to me, seeing her kind of PTSD from the war that we see a little bit in from the Klingon War in season 2, to me actually plays and gives kind of a better explanation for this state of her. Is she's wants to be an explorer. That's the one that we see. But when there's some type of war or conflict, she's very untrustworthy. I mean, yeah, they definitely lean into it more into this because we are playing up with a character from the original series. But it did kind of work for me again on my rewatch, seeing how her reaction is with dealing with the Klingon diplomat or ex Klingon diplomat. I don't know. He defected. And seeing with all that, so I found that kind of interesting. I also, I gotta say, I really see this more as a homage almost than a recreation of the episode, because what we've seen in previous checks, when they kind of go back to original series or do that stuff, they often very much change to like the old school, how everything looked. And we have we've already sort of updated what those old looks would look like now through a modern lens. So yeah, it makes this really feel much more of an homage. We're viewing it through this lens, the lens of Pike. What would that situation have looked like with a different captain in the chair, who has different motivations and is looking at things a little differently, has a different level of experience than what Kirk ends up having. So yeah, I mean, seeing this more of a what if type of idea, I think works. And yeah, we're seeing what's happening on the Romulan bridge because we're viewing this universe, this timeline, not just everything through Pike's point of view. I think for us as the audience, it informs us of the larger scope of what he is dealing with in this world. That everyone is acting a little differently. It's not going to go the way that Pike would normally want something like this to go. And it has its little differences because he is there and the Farragut is there, that of the captain changing where he is. And, you do have slight variations of what happens. And perhaps that kind of leans into more of like the whole Luna storyline of why she is, in a penal colony right now and hasn't gone through the whole release, and gotten free. Is something within that choice, not writing that letter, twisted something, again, and to me, it also works well because it gives a nice hint of what that big finale cliffhanger is going to be without being too revealing for it. So, I mean, to me, all of that kind of works. I don't really see it again as trying to recreate the old episode, but really like in that circumstance, what if Pike had still been captain on the ship, and would that have led to war? And obviously it ends up doing that. But the one thing that I also noticed that was kind of a nice little difference is even Spock is more classic Spock-ish. He is much more logical, and I found, kind of like informed than what we've seen. Well, I've seen season 2 recently, and he went through a whole little emotional arc in with this. But I think even from season 1, he was a little bit looser, whereas what we have in here is a much more logical, shut down Spock. So we can see that he has had some difference over time, which again I think played in very much well to Leonard Nimoy's performance in the original series.
Yeah, I think Ethan Peck did an amazing job as well. I think you can definitely tell that he was playing Spock differently. As you said, there was another word for line recreation was when Spock was talking about, if they're an offshoot of my Vulcan blood, and I think this likely, then the imperative comes even more to attack. I didn't quote that directly, but he did do it verbatim, and I just love the way that he played that. I think it just really worked. So I did want to point out in the chat, Jay Kamen 99 saying, I like this episode. I just don't think it's top 25 in all of Trek. The butterfly effect is shown here. How one change created so many changes, but I feel that they didn't have enough similarities to Balance of Terror. And then he later on mentions the Centurion, who was the wise old Romulan character who was in the original series. But I think his exclusion was, again, a result of them having to condense and streamline the episode. And as much as I did like that character, I think I see why they wrote him out. I think he wouldn't be entirely necessary for this episode. Instead, they focused more on the belligerent sub-commander who was in Balance of Terror, and they focused more on him, who was more sort of relevant to what happened at the end. So I like how they handled it, personally.
Yeah, and as I said, I mean, it is a great adaptation. It's like a good cover song, putting your own spin to it. You can't just do it beat by beat, and you can't. There's such a thing as doing too much of the original as well. And especially since they had their own story to tell, they have the Pike story to tell. They have to have the scene at the beginning with older Pike coming in. You have to have the wrap up at the end, and then they threw in their own thing at the end. So in order to have time, I actually thought it was pretty much perfect, other than I didn't love the Ortegas thing, but other than that, I thought it was pretty much a perfect homage, as Darrin says, to the original. It kept the perfect amount of things, and it cut out the things that should have been cut out, like the weapon room, the phaser firing room. And I agree about the old Centurion. I think it would have just been, if he had been there, would have been just for the purpose of having a character who was in the original episode, and he wouldn't have really fit in this one. So I pretty much agree with all the choices they made in what they cut out and what they kept.
And plus,
I was just going to say, and if they were going to do that, then they might as well just have James Frann return and have him play the character, the same actor who plays Sarek in this universe, to have him play the Romulan commander. I mean, if you're going to lean that far into it. But you're right. I think that's why the homage adaptation, what if viewpoint is better, because again, none of that serves the purpose of what this tale is supposed to be. Is that Pike is not the right person, which I'm sure we'll get in with the Pike Kirk discussion. You know, the purpose of this is an analysis of Pike's approach versus Kirk's approach, and what was needed at the time, and the cost of what that's going to be, so that there isn't a quick fix to any of this stuff. It's an analysis of character, not just the specifics of the event that happened.
Now, I will say I did like seeing one of the other things I loved about this episode. I like seeing events of Balance of Terror done with modern special effects, and not the cheesy and more better sort of acting and dialogue. And so just modernizing that, I actually loved that aspect of it personally. But yeah, so yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the Kirk and versus Pike's approach. I believe this is the first episode we see Paul Wesley.
It is, yeah.
James Kirk, yeah. And
I just want to add that too was a surprise, because we knew Paul Wesley was going to be playing Kirk, but they announced it as the second season.
Yes.
Tell us that he would be sneaking in the
yeah. And this is another sort of thing I'm kind of iffy about. I don't know. To me, I thought maybe you don't actually need to have Kirk there to compare Kirk's approach to Pike's approach. I think they sort of took it sort of were more on the nose, being like, aha, having the two actually talk to each other and say how they approach it differently. I thought maybe it might have worked better as sort of a more subtle, like knowing that that Kirk handled it differently and that's how it handled it correctly. But then again, maybe it's because I'm such a nerd and seen this episode a billion times that I would have picked up on that easily. Maybe some people wouldn't have, but I still liked it. I still liked it, having Kirk there, and I did like Paul Wesley as Kirk, and I think I've definitely warmed up to him more in season 2. And it was, I don't know, I just think having the two ships there adds a different dynamic, but perhaps that's part of, if Pike were in control of the Enterprise, there would be two ships there instead of one. And yeah, and so the whole point of the episode, though, is, as Darrin mentioned, is that Pike's approach doesn't work, and it causes a war, and Kirk's approach would have worked. And maybe that's how having them two argue about their different approach actually does sort of work in some ways to sort of highlight that and sort of make it clear that this is what's changed. And I think that's a very, very interesting way, especially for Star Trek. And I think this is still Star Trekian, but it's sort of against the typical Trek theme of peace wins out the day, always negotiate and everything, where here we see that sometimes it's better to just attack, and that Kirk was able to make that judgment, and Pike was in fact, Pike was, and I thought it was interesting that Pike thought that part of what fucked up the future was Kirk himself. Oh, Kirk's too much of a oddball. He takes risks. He doesn't follow the rules, so he's the one who's going to fuck everything up. But it turns out Kirk's approach was actually the right approach, which I thought was a very interesting way to take it, a very dynamic way to take it. And we do see how that's applied. In fact, it's very true to the episode of Balance of Terror, where they pointed out that Romulans strike when they see weakness. And that's why Kirk thought it was important to get the Romulans before they return home, because they would think the Starfleet was weak. And so Pike didn't get that, and so by negotiating, he was actually showing weakness. So yeah, that's another thing that really worked for me. I thought worked for this episode a lot. Alyssa, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, for me, I thought we needed Kirk to be there. When I saw this episode, it had been maybe a year since I saw Balance of Terror. Balance of Terror is not one that I've watched like 100 times. I've seen it a few times. So it was a good reminder, jog of my memory of exactly what Kirk did. And I think for me, it was important to see that direct contrast. It would not have been as effective to me if Kirk wasn't there and we just had to rely on our memory. Oh, wait, what did Kirk do again? So to me, it worked really well to have that direct contrast. And to have the two of them actually argue about it, and to Kirk end up being correct. And for Pike to say in the end, I think this was supposed to be you. I don't know why Kirk said, "Yeah, I got that feeling too." I don't know why he thinks that, um, but yeah, that all worked really well. But I needed that personally. Like, I'm so glad that they included that, and uh, I was again. It was a surprise. Like, they had announced that Paul Wesley had been cast as Kirk, but it was supposedly for season 2. So for him to just suddenly show up here was a very pleasant surprise. And I thought it worked extraordinarily well. Is it a little awkward, a little bit, having the 2 ships instead of the 1? Maybe a little bit. But I think it was important to have the 2 characters there so you can have that direct contrast. And yeah, showing that sometimes, although your piece is well meaning, that it may not always be the best approach when dealing with a hostile opponent. And it kind of makes me think a little bit about the Edith Keeler resolution in City on the Edge of Forever, that she wanted to, have peace. And then as a result, in the timeline in which she lives, like, the Nazis used that to win World War II because she was delaying too much for peace. So this actually isn't the first time in Trek where they've done a similar concept. And I do find that interesting because it's a little more nuanced approach to the usual anti-war Trek message without going against the usual anti-war Trek message, is just showing how nuanced it is. So I really love that a lot. So I love that aspect of it as well. So yeah, this all worked really well for me.
Yeah, and it's an interesting actual callback to Discovery's first episode with, was it the Vulcan greeting,
The Vulcan,
where
hello.
The Vulcan hello.
Vulcan hello, yeah, is no, you attack first to show that you're positioned. In which case, that being the approach that should be played here. Actually, if we look at the Vulcans, the Romulans, would sort of make sense that might be the first move that they might go for. But I think it was also kind of interesting. I mean, I did love having the 2 of them together, having Kirk and Pike kind of go off, because again, a lot of the purpose of this episode is to see how the difference in approaches can lead to different effects. That sometimes Pike's approach isn't going to be the one that's needed. It's going to be more of Kirk. And the fact that Pike is actually concerned that it's Kirk's aggression that's going to be the problem. Oh, I think he may go too far. I think that he may instigate the war. Kind of forces Pike to go the other way, to lean into his, I think, diplomacy more than he might have without Kirk there, just because he's so concerned. It kind of pushes him more into, I got to be sure that we try this other way, because I'm afraid otherwise that's what's going to lead to war. The fact that it is exactly the opposite of that, I think, is that interesting character study, Bart, which shows why he is not the best person to be in this position at the time. But yeah, I like the back and forth, and the fact that there is disagreement but still respectful. There's even that point where I think Kirk says it's like, hey, but am I wrong? And if I am, tell me and I will back down. And Pike can't. So I do like the kind of dynamic, which makes it kind of nice at the end, where he's like, I think that you should have been the one that was here instead of me. It is kind of a symbolic passing of the torch and accepting of fate, which again, small, nice. To me, it's a subtle way of kind of giving that nod without being overtly in your face about it.
Yeah, another small little thing that I noticed changed was Sam Kirk being on the Enterprise. And I was like, shouldn't you be a scientist now in that colony getting ready to be killed by those flying pancake thingies? But anyway.
Well, maybe because when James Kirk becomes captain, then he has to leave the ship, and then he ends up going and said, "You know what? I'm going to leave Starfleet. I'm going to go to the station."
Yeah.
Now, James Kirk was ride or die with Pike. I don't like my brother anymore. If Pike's going, I'm off of this ship.
Yeah.
He and Ortega's left together.
You mean Sam? Yeah.
All right, so in the chat, Jordan Johnson says, I think Strange New Worlds use canon characters with different actors playing them much better than Picard did, example, Guinan. Yeah, I mean, and again, the Guinan thing from season 2, Picard, not the actress' fault, it's the writing's fault. But yeah, they definitely Strange New World. I like the way, and I think someone earlier in the chat asked me how many original series characters are we going to be introduced to by the end of Stranger Worlds, and I think all of them. And maybe they're going to do a spinoff where we get the original series.
They should not. I hope they don't do a spinoff, but I want, before the end of this series, maybe probably in the last season, maybe even toward the end of the last season, I would like to see an episode set in the Kirk time period with all the actors that they're introducing in Strange New Worlds playing our original series crew. But just one episode, not a spin. You can't do a whole spin-off on this because we've already seen those characters and they've already done the alternate timeline thing. So enough of that. But I would love to see like one singular episode that has all of them, not a whole series or a movie. So.
All right, so let's move on to Spock's fate. So this was an interesting choice to the episode that I really thought added a lot to it. That and Spock is I don't know if they say necessarily killed, but they say if he survives that he will, be like.
I believe when just watching it just now, it sounded like older Pike was saying that he died because.
Oh, older Pike said he died. Okay. Nurse Chapel was like he will never be the same, even if.
Yeah, I got the impression he's going to end up in the beepy chair when she said
that.
Yeah. Pike said older Pike implied that he died. I think he even said the words like he died and he had all this other great stuff that he was supposed to do, and he was supposed to make peace with Vulcans and Romulans, and I think he had a line about he had some galaxy changing stuff.
Yeah,
died. So I think that was my read of it, that he did die.
Also, we got sort of a situation here where I think older Pike implied that every timeline in which Pike doesn't end up in the beepy chair, Spock dies.
Yeah, he did. He did have something like that too, where we had seen multiple possible timelines.
And that's what kind of sells Pike on. Definitely. I mean, the Romulan War millions died was definitely a selling point too. But yeah, especially the fact that he is his wanting to live is causing someone else to suffer in his place, which is not the type of person he is, and he's realizing that. And also you see, I like how they play the Pike and Spock bond throughout the episode. Like even in the start when Pike reveals that he's from the past and has Spock to do a mind meld so he'll actually believe him, and how that plays out. And Spock is aware that this is a past version of Pike. I thought was a very interesting way to go as well. But yeah, that ending when Spock is completely like burned and totally fucked up was so emotionally powerful. The music was beautiful, and we do pan over and see that it was the woman who died who was in the married, the engaged couple rather than the man this time. And yeah, that was that added the such power to the episode to me, and also the scene where Pike and Spock talk after Pike goes back to the original timeline, where Spock kind of pieces some of it together, and from the way Pike's behaving, that Pike is sacrificing himself for Spock's benefit, and how they say, Spock says, how much he appreciates him as a captain. You really see their relationship. And this is what I was referring to specifically when I say this is making TOS better in retrospect, because it justifies the menagerie that Spock is willing to risk his career and his life for Pike's benefit. And I also think it adds, knowing the end of the menagerie, which I think some people forget about or don't think about, adds a dynamic to this as well, because Pike thinks that he's going to have this miserable existence in the BP chair, when in fact he goes off and spends the rest of his life with Vina, and has this family life that he always wanted, that he was ruminating about in the cage. And so he actually has a happy life ahead of him. He just doesn't know it yet, which adds a bit of a interesting dynamic as well. And so that makes his decision to not stop the future even more imperative. And it is, I guess future Pike would know this, because from his perspective, that would be an alternate timeline that he didn't experience, which is why he didn't bring that up. But yeah, I just love the scene. This is what makes the episodes. One of what makes the episodes so great is that scene with Pike and Spike, and almost really brought me to tears. Darrin, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I thought the two of them was perfect. Really, how how their friendship reverberates through time, and there is that subtle understanding with very little said. I thought was perfect. The fact that the purpose of the show is to come that it's not you, it's this person. They're the important one. They're the one that you have to protect, because peace will be possible in the future. So many great things will be done, but only if this other person lives, which requires your sacrifice. The fact that, of course, they are the great friends and have that connection, it reverberates even deeper. But to me, that's kind of an interesting part, in a way of hey, you're not the lead of this story. This guy is. You're the supporting character. Is, to me, kind of an interesting point of view. I mean, it's not really everybody's a lead in their own tale. But that idea is that whatever things that you can do, they will not be what this person can do. This is your job is to get them ready for what they can do in the future. Is to me a real kind of interesting, subtle, a psychological play within this scenes as well. I mean, outside of saying that this unfortunately bride and groom are doomed in every universe, one of them is going to pass away. They were never going to get married. Should have listened to your mother. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, sorry. Humor aside with that should be humorous about people dying there. I don't know why I'm laughing about it. But yeah, I love that, because again, so much of this has been about Pike protecting his own fate. Does he have to accept what he has to do? Or is that responsibility protecting this small child and his future of what can happen? But all that ends up being a person, when it really comes down to, no, this has to happen to save the galaxy, to save the Federation, to save a future versus massive wars and millions or billions of deaths versus future possible peace. It is so very Star Trek in that, which is, I think, kind of, again, it's a perfect way to sort of wrap all of this and encapsulate exactly why these choices and why this future has to happen. And I think it honors the Spock character very nicely in preserving what we've known through multiple series, original series, this one, through Next Generation, and everything else, of what he accomplishes. So I thought that was all a beautiful way an unexpected way to make this happen.
Yeah, and I think it was important to have the Spock piece of it in there. You could have left that out and just had well, this is the weight of, yes, millions are going to die. This is going to affect the entire galaxy. Obviously, that is way more important than Pike being in a BB chair and a couple kids dying. Uh, you have that, but I think in order to make that connection to the audience and to have the gravity of the situation really resonate with the audience. What we have been really following all season long is the characters, and we've really gotten into the characters and these particular actors' portrayal of these characters, and to like bring Spock into it and making it more of a personal thing and something that I think can affect the audience a little more, making it a little more personal. Not that because millions of people in the future dying. It's just kind of abstract. It's kind of it's not something we see happen. It's just something that they say. Oh, millions of people are going to die. That's awful. But I think having a real character in be affected, a real character die, and then see how that affects Pike. I think that was really important to bring us into it. So I did like how they made that connection. And as Mark said, it does kind of, retroactively justify Spock's behavior in the menagerie a little bit. Kind of the way that, in Star Wars, the Clone Wars kind of, fixed the prequels a little bit. And there are some who are hoping that some of the, current Star Wars shows can like correct the sequels a little bit. It kind of does that for the menagerie, even though in the menagerie itself, when that episode aired, it was very clearly just a plot device to show footage of the cage. Like I just wanted to show footage of the cage since nobody had seen it before at that time. So they kind of made up this motivation of Spock that we had never seen before. We had not. And that's one of my many problems with the menagerie. Like I don't feel that connection in that episode. But here, like they show us, no, they do have kind of a connection, and I like that. I like Strange New Worlds going around and retroactively showing these bonds. I mentioned that in season 2, how they've kind of retconned a relationship between Kirk and Uhura that was never there before. But I like that. I like them going in and showing us those bonds that these characters had that we never really got to see in the original series. Having the Spock death in there was really important for several reasons. It worked really well for me in that regard, in both regards.
Another thing I thought about is when Future Pike was kind of vague in what Spock has. He still has stuff to do, like galaxy changing things, and it's obviously implying what he makes peace with the Romulans and the Vulcans, and how that ends up having a huger impact going towards the next millennium. But I also thought about he also played a key role in making peace with the Klingons.
Yeah, and Pike actually he does a couple mentions. He does specifically mention that Spock is going to, not only will this war not supposed to happen, but Spock is supposed to make peace with the Romulans. He does mention that specifically. And makes a more broad comment about galaxy-changing stuff. And I thought of the Klingon word, the peace with the Klingons as well. Spock does a lot of galaxy-changing stuff.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Future Pike kind of saying, it's like, look, we're kind of important still, but like not as important as this guy. Like he's got a lot of stuff to do.
Which wouldn't have happened in his timeline. So I guess the Klingons were to imply the Klingons showed him at the time Crystal Lee stuff.
Yeah. All right, so I wanted to talk a bit about how this resolves Pike's season-long storyline, which is what we were mentioning earlier. And I thought this, because throughout the season, this is something that was haunting him, something that he was like very sort of dreading, causing to grow a beard and live in the wilderness or whatever. And even after he came back, he was still kind of is something that was really haunting him, which we see at the start of this episode. But I feel like having this vision it's like a tapestry kind of thing where it makes him change his whole sort of worldview, his whole way of looking at things, because he knows that the future will be better. That he needs to sacrifice himself to pretty much save the galaxy, and that he's okay with this because really, if you didn't have the Spock element to this, he could be a dick and try to be like, well, oh, I'll just retire and have James Kirk take over the ship, but I'll still save myself from the BP chair. But the future Pike specifically points out any future you don't go on that BP chair, Spock dies. It kind of nails it, and plus that would just be silly of him to do that, but a lesser character would do that. But yeah, but he's more like resolved. He's more sort of, it's not haunting anymore. He's accepted his fate now, which I think again was a beautiful way to end the season, which is again another powerful note of this episode. Any thoughts on that?
Me?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, you just made me think of the Flash again because you haven't watched it yet, but that's a spoiler. Because he kind of tries to cheat a little bit at the end, and so the way that you're talking about having Pike cheat, you can't cheat fate, you can't cheat the timeline. So yeah, Pike has to go along with it, and I think he's at peace with it, and I think that is a beautiful resolution to his storyline because it is something he's been struggling with all season long. And yeah, as we talked about earlier, like I can't see them possibly drudging this back up again in season 2. This is a very nice, very clean resolution here that he is at peace now with his fate, and he's got the bonus, as you mentioned, Mark, of that he doesn't even know that he actually is going to get to go and live with Vina and the Telosians and be happy. Like he doesn't even know that, and that's just going to be a nice little bonus for him when he gets to that point. But he has come to a sense of peace that this is his fate, and this is, even though there's other people involved, there's those 2 kids. It's still better than the alternative. And I think he very much comes to a place of peace with that. So very well done. And once again, Anson Mount, fantastic. Very, very good. So yeah, I really, really love it. It's one of the reasons why, to me, this is one of the best episodes in Modern Trek. And although I don't, as I said, don't compare Modern Trek with Old Trek. I think there was somebody in the comments saying, well, to me, this wouldn't be in the top 25 of all of Trek. And, everyone has a right to their opinion. But I understand if you're going to combine Modern Trek and Legacy Trek, I can understand why you would put this in the top 25. And to me, that is one of the big reasons, is the character story and the character resolution for Pike's season-long arc was just so beautiful. It's so well done.
Yeah, him soft chewing through the bridge there at the end. Like I said before, I think it's really that kind of sign of like, all right, I've accepted where we are. This is going to be good. And it's actually kind of an interesting thing because in the following season, in season 2, I always felt there was a certain line of like, yeah, we know where everybody's going to end up, but the journey is what it's all about. And in some ways, this is that kind of graduation from that of like, okay, I know what's going to happen to me, but I don't know what's going to happen between now and then. And that's really what it's all about. I think there's a certain comfort in like, hey, the universe is going to be just fine without me, maybe even a little bit better. I'm doing what needs to be done to save things, plus protecting my friend and all of that stuff. I mean, again, that line from Spock, I feel like I must, what does he say? I have to thank you, Captain, though I'm not entirely sure what for. I think that's kind of a great way to end it. And again, kind of bring us forward, even with the rest of the characters, since we start seeing some original series characters going forward, is we know where they go. Everybody knows where they end up. It's the journey getting there that we don't know all the things about, and that's where the excitement and that's where the adventure is. And I thought that was a perfect way to kind of breach right into that point of view.
Yes, in the chat, Jordan Jones is reminding me that they did hint at the storyline in season 2 in the episode Those Old Scientists, where Boimler points out those because he bumbles. He almost gave away Pike's future, but Pike already knew. He's like, I already know what happens to me. But then he has that important message of reaching out and spending time with his friends while he still can. Which I think was a nice way to touch on that storyline.
Yeah, it gets mentioned, but it's not. It's been resolved. They're not really.
Yes.
They're focusing more on a different thing, which is Pike. Been making the best of the time that he has with the people he loves, which was very. I love that episode so much. So it's very good.
Yes. Absolutely. All right, so let's touch on the cliffhanger ending here, which does seem a little bit tacked on. They did hint at it earlier, but with Patel showing up and arresting Una and Pike sort of attacking, the guy, and Una telling him no, and he's like vowing, I'll get you back. And that's why I thought, I loved the trial episode of season 2, which we talked about recently. It was one of my favorites, but one of the disappointments I had was that Pike wasn't more involved in saving her, because that's what it seemed like they were really leaning on towards here. He did go to that pollution plant or whatever and almost suffocate himself in order to get the lawyer, but I thought he would be more involved based off of this ending. And then there's the question of, the Lower Decks season 2 ending had happened just before this, which is pretty much the same thing. And with the cat, in that case it was the captain who was arrested or whatever, although I think Strange New Worlds handled that cliffhanger way better. But yeah, I don't know. It did seem a little. It didn't bother me. It didn't detract from the episode. It wasn't like, oh, I got to take some points off this episode because of this ending. But I don't know if it was really needed to be there. Maybe they could have had this happen at the start of season 2 instead. That seemed kind of irrelevant to the rest of the episode. But I mean, they hinted at it with the future, but again, it's simply Pike being in command of the Enterprise instead of Kirk is why Una actually got off the trial. And the other thing I was going to say, even in that episode with Una's trial, they never said they were going to take her to a penal colony. They said that she would, that they were just going to force her to resign. But I guess maybe they're saying she failed the trial so badly that they made her go to the penal colony because Pike wasn't. I don't know.
Well, no, they changed it after she refused to take the plea. Then they came out and said, "You're complete this accommodation and you're going to prison."
Oh, okay.
Yeah, after she refused to take.
But after she refused to,
okay. That they did. So it was prison on the line in that episode.
Yeah. Okay, but anyway, your thoughts on this whole cliffhanger ending, Alyssa?
So I don't know. I like and not bothered by it as much now. I definitely, to me, although it didn't take any points off the episode, it was still a 10 out of 10 and still one of the best episodes of Modern Track. That was one of my critiques. One of my only critiques is that ending did feel really tacked on. That it kind of pulls away from the focus of the episode, which was Pike, to suddenly just have this Una thing happen at the end. But now, after having seen season 2, I don't know where else they would have put it. They would have had to, I don't know, to change episode 1 entirely and maybe have it at the end of episode 1. They couldn't have it at the beginning of episode 1. So now that I've seen season 2 and well, where else were they going to put that scene? So now I kind of feel a lot better about it than I did last season, where it did feel really tacked on to me. And also, as you mentioned, the lower decks thing, we had just seen that, and I hated that ending, or the cliffhanger ending of season 2 of Lower Decks, and it felt like didn't they just do this exact same thing on another show? But I'm kind of have that bad taste out of my mouth now. It was really recent at the time, and so I'm kind of over it now at this point. So yeah, or maybe it was the wait. Didn't Lower Decks come on after Strange New Worlds? So maybe it was the other way around. I don't remember. When one of them, I definitely when the second one did it, I was like, we already saw this. I can't remember which was which.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, came after Lower Decks season 2, and then season 3 aired after.
Oh, right, season 3 aired after this one,
which is why season 4 is going to air right after season 2.
Right. So yeah, I was like, didn't they already? Yeah, I was like, didn't they already do this with this? Yeah, but now like that bad taste is in my mouth, and now that I've seen season 2, it kind of makes more sense that where else are they going to put this scene? So I'm okay with it now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I do like that they had kind of hinted to the episode that Una was gone and something had apparently happened. I mean, it does certainly feel tacked on, but it's also the switch you have to do because, again, he's soft chewing through the command deck, like, hey, everybody, it's cool, right? We're great. We're going to take off. Everything's fine. Oh, no, it's a cliffhanger. The season's about to end. We have to make something not fine. Una, you're out of here. Yeah, and I agree. There was kind of a shift for what you'd expect from Pike, because at the end of this, he's like, this isn't over. I'm going to go call a lawyer. It's just not really the direction we were expecting him to take. But also, having watched season 2, I did find an interesting moment when they say we need the captain and the first officer and Una in the transporter room. She gives that look like she knows exactly what's going to happen. And as we learn later on, spoilers for season 2, that she turned herself in. They do give that brief little moment in her where I watch this and I'm like, oh, she's expecting this. Even when she goes into the room, she's in the back and she's standing like she's ready to go. So I thought that was, I like that particular tie-in into season 2, that they actually give the hint of her responsibility, that she's not surprised by this at all. I thought was kind of a cool thing to re-experience. So yeah, does it feel tacked on? Yes, but that's because, like you said, Alyssa, this was a very Pike focused, character focused episode. But we have a season that's ending and we have to have a cliffhanger. Those are in the rule books. So if you're going to do it, this one is worked because in the previous episodes building up to this is when we found out about Una being an Illyrian and her willing to turn herself in, and Pike saying no. So they did set this up, I think, kind of nicely. So while they wrapped up that season arc, they could carry over one of the things that hasn't been dealt with left during the season, which carries us over into season 2. So I think it really worked in that sense.
Also, I liked how Patel was kind of like, oh, she's an Illyrian to Pike, as if he's like, yeah, I know that. Who cares? Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Though he doesn't say that he knew, which I thought that was great. It's like, it doesn't matter. She's my first officer.
But it's kind of, he doesn't say it, but I thought it was kind of implied. He's like, yeah.
Well, yeah, he certainly doesn't react like, an Illyrian? What? He just completely like comes through that question like, that's not the problem. I'm looking at this. So yeah, I think it was one of those that were done nicely by taking care of it being done quickly without overselling anybody's hand.
All right, well, cool. We can go ahead and end our discussion of this episode now. Alyssa, you had already elected to abstain from this question, but I'll ask you, Darrin, if you would care to answer. If you were doing your own top 25 episodes of Star Trek, do you think you would put this episode higher or lower than what I have it?
Well, if I was including new Trek, as we are assuming that we do with this, because it is in your top 25. Yeah, here if not higher, honestly. Still have obviously more of your top 25 to go through, so I can't make a direct comparative for what's coming ahead now. But no, like you said, this is one of my favorite episodes. Actually, between this is one of my favorite for season 1, and the trial I think is my favorite episode of season 2. So this whole connects actually all very nicely for me. I think this was a beautiful homage to an old episode, retelling a story through a different point of view while focusing on the character difference and wrapping up Pike's storyline through that whole first season. I thought this was beautifully done and gives a satisfaction that I wasn't really expecting this kind of storyline wrap up would give. So yeah, as I said, at least this high, if not higher on my list. And by higher, I mean closer to number 1.
Yes. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining in the chat. We had Jordan Johnson, J. Kamen 99, Norman Buckwald stopped by for a little bit. Yeah, everyone who was watching this in the archives, thank you so much for joining. And of course, thanks for the special guests, Alyssa and Darrin. Thank you so much for joining. Now, Alyssa, if you want to give a quick shout out where people can find you and what you're up to.
You can find me on Alyssa Jean's Reviews, where I am currently going through my own top 100. I have made it up through number 11, with numbers 10 through 6 coming in September. So check that out. And I will be reviewing Star Trek Lower Decks weekly when it starts on September 7th. So get ready for that. And I'm reviewing Star Wars Ahsoka when I can. I'll try to I want to get every episode in by the end of the season, but might be 2 at a time. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, come on over and check it out.
Cool. And Darrin, what are you up to nowadays?
Well, over on D's Reviews, we are discussing Ahsoka this new season. We just had a great discussion for the first 2 episodes with my man Mark right here and Rob from Smirking Reviews. So that was awesome. I know Alyssa's going to join us in another week or 2 on the 7th, I think. We've got you down for. So really excited to that. I'm enjoying the series so far. I think it's a nice new addition to the Star Trek realm, though, as with a lot of the Disney Plus shows of late, I am tentative in my comments early going in because I have to see if it sustains. But so far, I'm enjoying the show, and we are doing those discussions Thursday nights at 6 o'clock over on D's Reviews, and we'll be running through the end of that season.
Cool. And if you're finding me for the first time, my name is Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity at the moment, also covering Ahsoka weekly. Also, we'll be covering Lower Decks weekly when that comes out, going through every episode of The Next Generation. I'm up to season 1 still. I am going to take a couple weeks off in September, just having a break to get caught up on things. And then in September, sometime next month, we'll be doing another live stream for my number 19 on my top 25 list. So be sure to check that out. Check out my channel for everything else. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.